Everybody has heard about the Flash. Everybody knows who he is. He's one of DC's most popular superheroes, but chances are, when you ask anyone who his real name is, 9 times out of 10, they'll tell you it's Barry Allen. Barry is, and has been for the last decade, the most popular name attached to the Flash. Now, don't get me wrong, I love Barry Allen, but you know what I love more? Character progression. An evolving story. Changes to a status quo. And that's exactly what DC Comics had before the 2010s. Before the infamous universe reset that was the New 52, characters were allowed to grow and evolve. These days, it seems everything is stuck in one continuous cycle. I remember when death meant something in a comic book. When Barry Allen gave his life to save the multiverse in Crisis on Infinite Earths, everything changed. Who would take up his mantle now that Barry was gone? Why, his Midwest conservative loser sidekick, of course. Meet Wally West, an annoying ginger kid with abilities just like Barry Allen. He was such a loser, he had no notable achievements or stories as Kid Flash. But after Barry's sacrifice, something changed in Wally. He was forced to grow up, accept responsibilities, and evolve as a character. Barry was Wally's hero. He was obsessed with him. Growing up, Wally had had a rocky relationship with his parents. He went to live with his Aunt Iris, who he loved more than anyone. She was his role model, and he could always feel safe with her. Iris's boyfriend, none other than Barry Allen, became Wally's father figure. So, naturally, when Wally ended up in a freak accident that gave him the abilities of super speed, Barry revealed that he was the Flash. His two heroes were the same person, and Wally's dream became true. He got to train with the Flash, it's all he ever wanted. In his mind, I'm sure Wally thought it would never end. He would follow the Flash anywhere, solving crimes and living in fairy tale land forever. But real life caught up to him. Barry Allen gave his life to save billions, and Wally was alone. He was lost, he wanted to die. He had no one to turn to, no one to lead him. He had to make his own path. And this is really where he starts to become an interesting character, where he gets responsibilities, where he gets to change and develop, where he realizes the importance of his powers and responsibilities. Green Lantern and Jay Garrick, Barry's best friend and Barry's mentor, try to guide Wally. They want to see if he's worthy of the Flash mantle, but Wally doesn't take it up. Wally doesn't view it as a mantle. He views the Flash as just Barry, not a mantle he can just take up. Green Lantern and Jay want Wally to grow up and be like Barry, because the world needs the Flash. But Jay especially still sees him as a child. And that's what Wally really was. He had no idea how to be a hero without Barry. He always relied on him to do everything for him. And now Barry's gone, Wally tries again and again to prove himself. He wants to make Barry proud. He wants to prove that he can be good enough. Through trial and error, he gains Jay's support and makes the Flash his own. With a new symbol, a new belt, a metallic red, and white-out Batman eyes, his distinct Flash is born. Wally remains the world's Flash for over 2 real-world decades. In that time, he married, had multiple children, and saved the multiverse dozens of times. He was an entire generation's only Flash. His love story with Linda Park was so well written over the years, it was rivaling Clark and Lois levels of comic romance. Now, over at DC, Jeff Johns and Dan DiDio, more on that loser later, decided what better way to spice things up than to bring Barry Allen back from the dead, and erase Wally and his advances as the Flash forever, a couple of years after Barry's return. The last 20 years of stories swallowed up by the void. New 52 begins. Where is Wally? Dan DiDio, the man in charge of DC Publications, hated Wally. He was a ride-or-die Barry fan, and the thought of Wally repulsed him. How dare characters evolve and grow? So, instead of bringing Barry back and having him work alongside Wally and his new family, he decided it must go back to the way things were when he still had hair. He deleted Wally West from existence. The New 52 acted as a great reset for a lot of characters. It broke up Clark and Lois, Wonder Woman was a goddess of war, and Barry Allen was once again the Flash. So where is Wally West? And that's just what was asked of DiDio again and again. So let's address the elephant in the room. New 52 Wally West. DiDio allowed his introduction because he knew there would be racist backlash. He knew people would be outraged. Wally could never become the Flash again. DiDio made sure of it. How disgusting is that? In 2020, Dan DiDio left DC, but we all know he was fired. But the damage was done. Wally had been gone for an entire decade, and when he was allowed to finally come back, it was from a place of racism and a way to divide fans. New 52 Wally West was eventually written into a new character who went by Wallace or Ace West. The original Wally, who was a grown-ass man and had a wife and kids, returned in DC Rebirth, a soft reboot to the New 52. However, still under Didio's reign, as this was in 2017, he was stuck as Kid Flash. Mind you, Wally was practically the same age as Barry at this point. He was from the pre-New 52 era, and like I said, he had a whole ass family. Yet he was stuck in this Kid Flash role. If you don't see how degrading that is for a character, you shouldn't get to have opinions. Because imagine Dick Grayson, after 10 years as Nightwing, decides to come back to Batman's side and dress up in a Robin costume. He's pushing 30. This is the Flash equivalent. Even after they dropped the kid from his name, he still wore that fuck-ass costume. Oh, but it pays homage to his time as Kid Flash. Well, what about paying homage to his time as a grown adult, where he actually has good stories? What happened to the Flash costume being his own, different from Barry's? Well, since Wally was deleted from comics for nearly a decade, he had no use for his costume quirks. Guess who DC gave them to? The newly revived Barry Allen. Thanks for keeping Barry's seat warm, Wally. I know it's been 20 years, but it's his turn to sit there now. Even in the CW show, they introduced Linda Park as a romantic fling for Barry. So first they give Barry all of Wally's unique costume quirks, and then they cuck him. It's brutal. What about Wally's personality traits? And his superpowered feats? Can he at least keep those? Anyway, enough yapping. I love Barry, and would have loved his return if it was done well. But the way it was executed, the way it was handled, and the way DC treated Wally West because of it, he should have just stayed dead. Over the last few years since DC has been relatively Didio-free, Wally West has had time to revert back to how things were. He's been given the opportunity to become the Flash again, and pick things up where he left them before the New 52 happened. Ace West was able to become his own character and start his journey as the new Kid Flash, but the damage has been done. An entire generation had no idea who Wally West was. It's Barry Allen this, Barry Allen that. The Flash TV show is the biggest culprit of stealing what makes Wally interesting and giving it to Barry. I mentioned Linda Park already, but dozens of stories and characters as well. Most famously, Zoom. Zoom in the TV show is dressed in all black, is voiced by the late Tony Todd, and is one of Barry's most formidable foes. He also kind of becomes the Black Flash, another thing from Wally's comics. 2-in-1 ass deal. In the comics, Hunter Zolomon, also known as Zoom, was Wally's friend. He gained the ability to slow the world around him after a freak accident. It's a unique way of having essentially super speed powers without actually having super speed. Wally was responsible for the accident, and that's why Hunter's hell-bent on turning him into a better hero. He doesn't want to destroy Wally, like the CW counterpart did with Barry. He wants to make him better. He went through crazy lengths to make this happen, pushing Wally to his absolute physical and mental limit. Zoom even did the unthinkable, and killed Wally's unborn children. He's truly the most formidable villain possibly in the DC universe, because he doesn't view himself as evil. He's doing whatever it takes, in his sick mind, to create the perfect hero out of Wally. So what happens to him doesn't happen to anyone else. Wally needs to be better. He often gets confused with Eobard Thawne, the Reverse Flash. Fair enough, their costumes are practically the same except for the eyes. Zoom's eyes are fully black with small red pupils, while Reverse Flash often has eye holes in his mask. It doesn't help that Eobard also used to go by Professor Zoom either. This is one aspect about the New 52 I liked. Even though it was Eobard Thawne under the mask, Zoom's New 52 costume was incredible. I think the black sets it apart from Reverse Flash. Also, side note, the reason Eobard was Zoom in the New 52 was because the writer at the time of the Flash book had no idea that they were different characters. A good example of why they should be more different design-wise. Anyway, the CW series writers obviously didn't read the comics and just took the name. They took the most interesting parts of what made Zoom a good villain and just made him a generic speedster who wanted to destroy Barry Allen. Haven't we seen this before? It's almost like this was the theme every season. Let's circle back to Linda Park. Having her used as a freak of the week villain and brief love interest for Barry Allen is so degrading for her character. She's one of the best love interests, in my opinion, in all of comics. She's written as her own character who has to deal with her husband being a superhero. She's capable and a character in her own right. one of the first in comics, as during the 80s and 90s, comics was largely a hugely misogynistic place. Just look at the huge over-sexualization of women during the 90s especially, and it's always been a case of women in comics only being characters because their boyfriend was a superhero. However, in the case of Linda, both her and Wally benefit from each other. They can have disagreements, but at the end of the day, they always find their way back to each other. She's extremely important to Wally, and her being in this world has saved his life on many occasions. She is his lightning rod, so seeing her be degraded as a one-off love interest for Barry seems disrespectful and low-key misogynistic. Also, kinda weird, like, that's usually his nephew's wife. Anyway, Linda Park is such an enjoyable character on the page, and her love story with Wally, evolving through the years from nothing to being parents of twins, is something that should be talked about more. It's a natural, healthy progress, and it really is the first time in a superhero comic I've cared about a romance. It's done very well, and more writers should look to it as an example of how to keep romance interesting and fresh. I mentioned Iris West being Wally's aunt, and how much she means to him. Before Barry died in Crisis on Infinite Earths, Iris was killed by the Reverse Flash. In a fit of rage, Barry accidentally breaks the neck of Reverse Flash, resulting in his death. This entire story was extremely detrimental to Wally's world. Iris taught Wally how to be good, he taught him things his parents couldn't, and made him feel loved. With her gone, and his hero on trial for the murder of her killer, his entire world was flipped upside down. It taught Wally valuable lessons about life and morality. So the Reverse Flash is dead, and he stays that way. Well, kind of. Because now I'm going to talk about possibly the best Flash story ever told, The Return of Barry Allen, the first one. I highly recommend reading this story for yourself, but for the sake of the video, I'll boil it down to the important part. I'll try to work around spoilers as best I can. Please read it for yourself after you finish the video, and click the like button and subscribe and stuff. Anyway, Barry Allen returns. In a way. It's only brief, but Wally gets to show his mentor everything he's accomplished as the Flash since he's been gone. But Barry isn't their only familiar face to return, as Eobard returns to haunt Wally. He's infuriated that Wally would ever try and replace Barry. He could never be good enough. He will always be below Barry in speed and heroism. Wally will never matter as much as Barry did, and Wally believes him. He's always thought this way. He's never reached Barry's top speed. He's always avoided doing anything better than his hero. To stop Eobard, and through trial and error, Wally is forced to break through his own mental blocks. It's not that he couldn't reach Barry's top speed, it's that he wouldn't let himself. He couldn't stand the thought of overshadowing Barry, his hero, and moving past his top speed would be like letting go of Barry. But in one of my favourite moments in Flash comics, Wally pushes himself through. He becomes the fastest man alive, and takes down Thorn for good. He sends him back to his own time. This was Wally's way of letting go, and accepting that Barry really is dead. It's one of my favourite comics of all time, and I highly recommend you read it for yourself and get the full experience. Throughout the years, Wally was a member of many superhero teams, most famously the Teen Titans. As the Teen Titans entered adulthood, and they dropped the teen from their name, the Titans shared Wally with the Justice League of America. This is really where we start to get into the part where a lot of writers disrespect and disregard Wally. In DC Rebirth, when Wally comes back, he's basically Flash Jr., running around with the Titans and taking up the young sidekick role besides Barry. But you have to remember, the Wally that returns in DC Rebirth is the same Wally from before the New 52 began. So he's a grown-ass man with a family and should only be slightly younger than Barry. And yet he is still forced into this youthful sidekick position. It's mind-boggling. Barry can't even secure a date with Iris because he's a bum. Yet his sidekick is married with 3 kids. Part of that is due to DiDio's reign at DC at the time, but even still. I'm sure most people who read comics have heard about Heroes in Crisis. It's a story about superheroes and mental health. There's a retreat where heroes go and talk about their trauma and their experiences. Tom King, the writer of this dreadful story, decides what better way to welcome Wally West back into the world of comics than to make him freak out and accidentally murder half of the heroes there. This is extreme levels of out-of-character writing and honestly just some bullshit. Tom King just throws shit at a wall and is incapable of understanding how characters work and why you need to be consistent with them. There's some really horrible writing within this book, and Wally unfortunately is the antagonist. This is really the slums of comics, and I can't believe the writer of this slopfest is a main writer for James Gunn's DCU. This did end up getting retconned later on by some other villain I don't really remember. It might have been Savitar. I don't care about fact checking. I hate this story and I don't want to reread it ever again. The point being is that it does get retconned, so Wally wasn't the murderer after all. This is just one example of constant misunderstanding and misuse of Wally's character. I think it mostly stems from Dan DiDio erasing Wally from comics for so long that people just forgot how to write him. This doesn't excuse Tom King, however, as he claimed on a podcast episode I saw once that The Flash number 54 was his favourite single issue of all time. Which really makes no sense because he clearly didn't pay attention to how Wally was written in that story. How do you read a masterpiece issue like The Flash 54 and then turn around and shit out Heroes in Crisis using the same character? Another bad characterization of Wally is actually one I might get some hate for calling out, but it's the Flash from the DCAU. Don't get me wrong, I love the DCAU. I grew up with it, but that doesn't mean it's perfect. It had pretty bad characterizations of most of the characters in the main Justice League lineup, and Wally is no exception. Now, I love Michael Rosenbaum's portrayal. I think he worked great as Wally. But to me, this version of Wally seems very much like the one that we got directly after Barry died in Crisis. No one really knew what to do with him at the time, so he was written to be a womanized and misogynist scumbag until William Misner Loebs came along and started turning him into a character we know and love today. And DCAU Wally does feel like that version of the character in a way. Not to the same extent, but out of any characterization in the comics, I would say that it fits the most. But that said, there's some really strong episodes I love in Justice League Unlimited especially, where Wally feels way more like Mark Waid's Wally, my favourite characterization. He's strong, smart and complex. He's willing to do whatever it takes for his friends and wants nothing more than to see his villains reform. So, I guess the DCAU is kind of a mixed bag when it comes to Wally West. Now, I mentioned Mark Waid, and we can't not talk about this groundbreaking run of The Flash. Officially starting in The Flash issue 62, Mark Waid takes what William Misner Loebs started and continues shaping Wally into one of the best written characters in DC. Mark Waid wrote the previously mentioned Return of Barry Allen, and his entire run is my favourite long-running DC comic run of all time. That's a lot of running. Anyway, to boil down my main problem with The Flash is that Barry Allen kind of needs to be dead for Wally to evolve. And now that they brought Barry back, and he got a TV show, a movie, and led the comic titles for a decade, he can't die. He's at his peak of popularity, but you can't degrade Wally to a sidekick forever. So the best scenario at this point is to have both Wally and Barry both hold the Flash mantle. A way this could work is to have two titles, which definitely isn't unheard of or impossible. Superman has, well, the Superman title, but also Action Comics. Batman has his Batman title in Detective Comics. Wonder Woman used to have Sensation Comics. Either way, I think the way DC is heading with The Flash, specifically Wally, with him finally having his own run again, and getting to expand his mythos is great. I plan to make more videos on The Flash in the future, so I implore you to subscribe so you don't miss my yapping. And that's really all I have to say today, so thanks for watching, see ya.